Good morning. Today we are going to discuss interfaces. Here, an interface is just like an abstract class. The difference between abstract class and interfaces are from an abstract class you have to create a subclass, and whatever method you have defined in your abstract has to be implemented by subclasses. But as far as interfaces are concerned, if you have a set of interfaces, then uh, a class, whether it is a subclass or whatever class it is, can um, implement that interfaces from multiple interfaces. That means multiple interfaces can be implemented by a single class. So the difference between abstract class and interface is, in an abstract class, if you are defining a method signature, then it is not possible to create you cannot have uh, methods of multiple abstract classes to be implemented in a single subclass. That means Java doesn't support multiple inheritance. But if you take an example, for example, suppose that dog is an animal and dog is a pet, and suppose that you have a class like animal, then properties of animal are there for dog, as well as suppose that another class you have pet, and this is or the dog is inheriting some properties of pet as well. That means as Java doesn't support multiple inheritance, but it has to inherit the properties of both animal and pet. So here in that place, what you can do is create this animal as an interface, not an abstract class. Create an animal as an interface and pet also as an interface. Then we can create a class dog, which is implementing methods of both animal and pet. So that is the difference between abstract class and interface. And interface is just like in an abstract class also, the method signature is given and you can override that in the subclass. And here also in the interface also, we have the method signature is given, and the class which is implementing that interface has to implement that. Tell the class what to do and not how to do that. Okay, suppose that you have a player class, and in that play, suppose that you have a method like player. The player has to play, and how he plays depending on the for example, if he is a hockey player, he has to he has to do something. Then if he is a football player, some other tactics he has to follow, and if he is a chess player, some other tactics. Okay, that means depending on the player type, that play method differs. Just like that, if you have a player class and player has to play, that means that play method is, that means you have to give an abstract method. That means method signature only is there. And suppose that you are going to if you have a player interface, then suppose that a class hockey player is implementing that, then in that play method, you have to give the tactics of a hockey player. Okay, so that's all about tell the class what to do and not how to do that. Syntactically similar to classes, this is just like classes, and they lack instance variables. For example, variables are not there because variables are inherited, but the value of that variable cannot be changed. If you have a variable declared inside an interface, it won't generate an error, and it will be treated as a constant. Okay, methods are declared without body, just like that means method signature only is given. Once an interface is declared, a number of classes can implement this interface. For example, suppose that you have a player interface, then hockey player, football player, chess player, etc. A number of methods can implement that player interface. Okay, then this is how we can define an interface. Initially, access, that means the access specifier should be either default or public. That means private and protected are not um, recommended or not allowed. Access interface, interface is the keyword. Interface should be there, interface should be there, and name. Then return type, that means these are method signature, and type final variable name equal to value means once you have defined a variable name and if suppose that assigned a value, then you cannot change it. That means it is not a variable, actually it is treated as a constant. And the example for an interface is that like this. Here this is a default interface, that means here we have not explicitly specified it as public, and this is default. That means after that interface is the keyword you have to use. Then after that callback is the method name. Here when I typed this some okay, no problem. Interface callback, and here void callback int param means here that is the method, that is the constructor or some um, method is given. This is the way you are going to have an interface. That means interface name, and inside that the method signature of that method is given. Here access specifier is public or default. Okay, then how to implement that interface? Implementing interface, one or more classes can implement the interface access interface, and the syntax is like this: access, that means access specifier should be given. Then class, a class can only implement an interface. A class is implementing an interface, then class followed by class name. That means that class extend superclass means that can be a subclass of another class. That's why we have given extend superclass. That means that class, a class which implements a particular interface can be a subclass of some other superclass. So that's optional, and implements interface interface comma etc. That means there is no restriction on the number of interfaces you can implement, and inside that class body should be given. That means if you are implementing this callback method, then class body means that the body of that callback method should be there, and access public or default. And here in this case also the access specifier should be either public or default. Method implement should be public, and inside the class the methods you have you're going to implement, that should be made public. Okay, now this is an example. The interface we have already discussed, callback interface, and inside that method signature is given, which is callback integer param means that callback is returning does not return anything, but it is taking an integer parameter. And here we are going to have, here this is public class client implement. That means we are going to implement this callback. Client implements callback. Here there's a spelling mistake. That means implements callback in here. There that capital C is used, actually it is small c. So public class client implements the callback procedure, and here public void callback int p. The body of that callback procedure is given here for the body of the callback procedure. That's why here public class client implements callback means callback interface is implemented by this procedure, this method or this class, and the body of the implementation is given. Okay, So in that class itself we can have another apart from these implemented methods, you can have other methods also. That means this is no a non-interface method. That means interfaced method interfaces, that means implementation of interfaces as well as non-interface methods also can be used inside the body of that class. Okay. Now interfaces, accessing implementation through interface reference. For example, if you have an interface callback, see here callback is an interface, and you can create an object or reference of type callback, and you can suppose that you have created a client object. See, you are your client class is implementing the callback procedure. Now you are going to create a callback reference, and suppose that you are creating a client object, then that client object can be referenced by the callback reference. Just like in our earlier discussion on superclasses and subclass, if you have a superclass reference, it can reference to a subclass object. Just like that, here an interface reference can reference to an implemented object, or the class which is implementing the interface object. The original interface can reference. Declare variables as object references that use an interface. Any instance or any class which implements this interface can refer to by this reference, similar to superclass reference to access a subclass object. Okay. Now interfaces, public class test interface. Here public static void means inside that you have a callback is equal to new client means here callback is actually it is an interface reference object, and new client means client is actually a class which is implementing the callback interface, and here this C is referencing that object. Actually callback is an interface reference, and that is pointing to a client object. Then C dot callback is called. What will happen? It will execute, no problem. That means the callback procedure which has been implemented by this client class is executed. Okay. Now suppose that you have another client implements callback. So in the previous case, the client was implementing the callback procedure. Now a class called another client is implementing the callback procedure. So that means it is printing the square of some p, that means some value you have passed, and it is printing the square of that. And now here public class test interface 2 means now here you have a callback reference. That means now you have a callback interface and two clients, client and another client, so two subclasses implemented your callback procedure. Now this callback is an interface reference, and that is pointed to client, and another object you have created and which is of type another client. Now you have two clients, client and another client, which has implemented the callback procedure. Now what will happen if C dot callback is called? Now actually this is pointing to, now C is pointing to the client object, and that's why how that client implemented the callback procedure, that will be called. Okay. Now after that the C is made as object, that means now C is pointing to another client, and when C dot callback 42 is executed, then the implementation done by another client will be executed. Okay. Now we are going to conclude the discussion on interfaces. Interfaces can be extended in the sense, if you have an interface, then you can create a subclass or sub interface of that interface, and again that interface has to be implemented somewhere. So that's the thing. Next, An abstract class can implement an interface. If an abstract class implements an interface, definitely a subclass of that abstract class, subclass of that abstract class should implement the interface. And variables are not allowed. If variables are there, then that will be treated as constant. Okay, thank you.